Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Kate Schlarf. I'm the VP of Growth Marketing here at Moovila. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us. This is a monthly engagement that we have, different educational webinars. So if you're here for the first time, welcome, and we're happy you joined us. You can find all of our webinars on moovila.com/webinars. We've got recordings of the past ones. Lewis is always on them. He's done some popular ones with the team from PAX 8. We've had some customers on in the past. If you are a customer and you're interested in doing one with us, you can reach out to me after at kate@moovila.com. But we're here today to talk about scheduling and to do a little preview of our new Smart Schedule tool. And just so everybody knows, at the end, this is being recorded. It should have told you when you logged in, so you can consent. If you're cool with being recorded, nobody sees anything from you or the chat later. But we do share these later, and we will share the full recording with you after. If you need to share it with a team member, want to pass it along, it will come in an email from me from kate@moovila.com. So just remember that email. You can reach out to me afterwards with questions, and that is also where the recording will come from. I know some people tell me it sometimes goes to spam because it's got the button and everything in it. So just a warning on that if you're looking for the recording later. But we're here today to talk about bridging the gap between building project timelines and scheduling projects. And today with us, we've got two of our Moovila team members. First off, we've got Becca. This is her first webinar with us. Becca's been with us for a little while, but she's been in the industry for a very long time. She has over 11 years of experience directly at MSPs and with MSPs, overseeing both project and service teams within the MSP vertical and MSSP. I know you're most recently at an MSSP. She is very understanding of the challenges and opportunities in the space and very committed to the success of our clients. She spends her time regularly onboarding MSPs now to the Moovila tool. So she's super familiar with the tool. And if you sign up for Moovila, you may have her as one of your onboarding specialists. So thanks for joining us, Becca.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Also with us is Louis Bagdonis, our Senior Program Manager of MSP. He is also on the onboarding team with Becca, helping MSPs every day get used to and comfortable with Perfect Project. He has got a ton of best practices. You may see him on the road for Moovila. He's speaking at different shows. I know next month, if you are calling in from Canada, I don't see anyone, but he's going to be at CanItCon speaking about projects. And he's also going to be doing some coaching sessions at different events in the future as well. His background has been in complex projects in the manufacturing space before he came over to us, luckily, a little over a year ago. And he is always working with MSPs and very helpful. So if you ever have any questions after one of these events, feel free to reach out to him on LinkedIn and ask your questions because he may have answers. And if he doesn't, I'm going to guess that Becca does. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to them and let them carry on with the content.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Becca, yes, very happy that you were here, and then I can suck you in to do these things. So I do want to talk about you for a little bit, just because we are really excited to have you from the MSP space. And, I know you've done client care and projects and service and basically every role, I think, at an MSP. And I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you like projects or managed services more? Professional?
Oh, great question. Well, I really think that when I was, working in that space, project management was really difficult. But a lot of times with the project management work that I was doing, I was also kind of splitting my time, which I'm sure a lot of folks on the call are really used to, having that, resources that might be split between things. I would say if I had Moovila at the time that I was managing those projects, I think I would have really enjoyed that work a lot more and been a lot more successful with it. It was very challenging with the tool sets that I had in place, the PSA tools on the project management side. Now, I do like with the project management piece that it's not always as reactionary as on the service side. So service side was definitely a lot of fire drills. So I would kind of say they both have their ups and downs, and from my experience and the challenges that I kind of had in each role. So I don't have a preferred one, but I think that I did spend a lot more time on the service side. Um, but again, splitting my time really between both aspects of the organizations that I was at. So not a clear answer, but
Very diplomatic of you.
I,
Very politically.
I don't want to upset anybody on a Friday. So
Yeah. I think what's interesting, and a lot of reasons we love having you, but you mentioned on the service side, the managed service side, a little bit more. And I think the topic that we want to get into today on project timelines and scheduling, a lot of what we see in the industry and how we're updating the tool around it, I think comes from how folks are doing things on the service side. And then we kind of just translate those processes over to the project side. And we see, this is the way we do it over there. So let's just make it work for projects, and not kind of taking a step back and saying, maybe we should be running projects different than the way we run our service tickets. Do you feel?
oh, absolutely. In a lot of ways, the service side is a large part of any managed services organization. So there's a lot of time and effort spent on how the systems flow on the service side. And sometimes because of that, the way that projects are run, they do tend to kind of mimic how you're organizing your service side. The other component of that too is that there is that shared resources that could occur between the service side and the project side. So now you have folks that are running your service side of house, running projects, and they're not competing for the same resources, but they're pulling from similar pools. And you want your team to stay busy. There can be lulls in projects. And sometimes when that happens, they do, those same resources might get pulled into internal projects or escalations on the service side. So you're absolutely right. We do see that service kind of gets put first, and then the other processes in the organization sort of get centered around how that's built out. So it could definitely be challenging. And I think that you're absolutely right with that.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? If you look at everything in the industry and everybody's talking about M&A and valuations and selling and all these things, it's all driven around your recurring revenue that is signed into contracts over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that another MSP or a private equity firm is going to value that higher, and that's recurring revenue that you can count on every month. It's
Exactly.
forecasts, how much cash you're going to be bringing in for it. So it makes sense. But we definitely, and you make a spot on point about shared resources, and we'll get into that for sure when we talk about the scheduling techniques. But we definitely are starting to see people, and I think this is why Moovila's taken off so fast in the MSP space, is people, I think, are starting to recognize, hey, we can do projects a little bit differently. And it's kind of, everything comes full circle. If you go back to break fix models, they were more project based, and transition to the managed services, and there's still going to be a lot of projects. And I know even the other week we were at a conference and we were talking about automation, and some people said, well, I think automation in the industry is going to make projects go away. And then I went to another talk and somebody said, well, every time we have to automate something, it's a project. Right.
Yeah.
So they are inevitable in any industry, in any maturity level, and especially in the MSP space. They're just prevalent. We're always going to have projects. So
Yeah, absolutely.
And I am known to go off on absolute tangents of things that make no sense. So please keep me online. But today, what we want to talk about first is, what's a baseline timeline in a project versus a schedule? Talk about part of that baseline timeline, why the critical path is important for your projects, and then start talking about, once we establish our critical paths, those different scheduling techniques and different styles of coaching that we see in the industry. And I don't know if we're necessarily going to recommend one, but we're going to talk about how you can leverage tools, processes to handle all of them. And then we will, as Kate mentioned, we'll show you our new smart schedule, which we're really excited about. We'll get it in the platform, and we'll do some critical path in there as well too. So from the top, baseline timeline versus scheduling. For those of you that aren't as familiar with Moovila, we've been in the project management space for a while in a number of different industries, and our platform is built on PMI best practices. And when we started to focus more on the MSP space, we were using the word project schedule all over the place all the time, right? And if you've taken any PMI courses, gone for your PMP, any of that stuff, they talk about the project schedule. And the project schedule, of course, includes, your scope and your budget and everything, but your timeline is part of that. So we came in and we used the word schedule all the time. And people will be like, okay, that makes sense. So it's on the calendar in ConnectWise. And we're like, well, no, it's the schedule of your project. And they're like, yeah, I need to schedule this resource. So there was definitely a little bit of a learning curve for us to figure out, okay, this is what we're talking about. People are talking about putting it on the calendar, and it makes sense, right? Everything for an MSP is driven off those W-2s and the utilization of your resources. It's going back and looking at, hey, what did they work on where last week? So why not get yourself ahead of that and put it on the calendar and schedule it? So, it took us a little while. We think we figured it out, hope we figured it out. We're, always open to feedback. But it definitely was a little bit of a learning curve for us when we were using the word schedule, talking about timelines, and in MSP's minds, schedule's used differently for sure. So when we talk about baseline timeline, right? You get your project in and you take a look at your scope of work and you start to build out the timeline, and a number of different things are going to go into that. So when you can start your project, right? A lot of people just go out and say that, hey, we have a 4-week lead time before we can start any new project. So customer, if you sign this today, we won't be able to look at it for another 4 weeks. So that, of course, is going to impact your timeline on your project. We've got hard deadlines by customers. So office moves, office relocations. Hey, my lease is going to be up by the end of October. I've got to make sure I'm in there by mid-October, right? Then we have to use that to work our way back. What other things, Becca, have you seen in your history and even in your onboardings here already in Moovila that are impacting MSP's timelines?
A lot of the time with MSP work, you are, especially project work, there is the chance that thinking about cutovers, for example, if a cutover project, you're going to be impacting that client's environment, and possibly bringing down major critical business operations for them, depending on their industry, healthcare industry. You've got to really plan a lot of things with those clients, and that could be a lot of back and forth. Going off the example of a healthcare industry, if you have a healthcare facility that you're planning a cutover for, or a nursing home, they have to go back to their staff and potentially move to paper during that cutover window. So maybe they're 24/7 too. So even just planning something after hours isn't going to work. I think something that really changes, aside from, just resource capacity and trying to schedule something, coordinating with clients can definitely take a lot of time and move those items backwards. The other thing, if you do have shared resources, let's say that a vulnerability comes out, that it's all hands on deck. If there's a Fortinet vulnerability, maybe you're pulling those resources to help mitigate potential issues with that. So the reactionary stuff, and then also the coordination with clients, I would say, could absolutely impact your timelines of projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much of that information that you can get ahead of time is going to just help you, right? And so taking all of those different items into account, you need to build your baseline timeline. See, it's hard for me just to not use the word to build your baseline timeline for that project. Hey, I'm going to start it here. Maybe I have a due date, or we see a lot in the MSP space that, hey, this project's in the backlog. I have to get it done when I can get it done. Right. But still, if we're going to start something, we should give our customer a due date. This was one that was pretty mind blowing to me coming into the MSP space when I'd ask some people, well, you communicate when your project is going to finish to your clients, right? And they're like, oh, no, we don't give due dates, right? And me coming from the customer and the project manager side, like that was always one of the biggest things was, hey, when's it going to be due? Because then you're planning other things off of that due date. So taking all that into account, what's your timeline start to finish? And then as part of that, you build out your critical path, which are going to be the work along the way that cannot slip. If any of the work along the way slips based on the dependencies between that work, then that's going to impact the end date of your project. So really identifying when can each piece of work along your project plan start, and then when is it going to finish? And that gives you the sequence all the way to the end. Number of reasons why it's important, right? You can give that due date to your customer. You can give your customer your milestone schedule or your deliverables, like when is that cut over? When are you going to go live? You know, if it's an onboarding, when they're going to be able to turn off their services from their previous provider and turn on with you. And it also, it gives you, it's in the title there, it gives you a baseline. It gives you your point of reference. It says, okay, this was my starting point. This was my plan. And this is what I have to track against. And as a project manager, you're going to live and die by that. And as the project kicks off, we know things are going to change, but because you have that baseline, because you have that timeline and that structure, it makes it easier to manage any change, any shifts that happen along the way.
Absolutely.
Anything to add to that one, Becca? Other reasons you think building that baseline timeline is important?
No, I think the point you made really about being able to go back to the client too and say, this is what we're forecasting for a due date, is they really appreciate that. Timelines do slip, but starting a project off on that foot where you're saying, this is what we're looking at for timing is huge to those clients. Again, especially depending on your client base and, you know, what things that the project might impact. That goes a long way and they really appreciated that. And you know, there were limitations with what I could do when I was running projects without having a tool like this in place. It's really difficult to provide that.
Yeah. And both of us have been on the customer success side of things. I feel like that's how a lot of people get thrown into projects, is because you're talking to customers and the projects are for customers. Then someone at leadership's like, wait, hold on a second. Why don't you just manage the project since you're the one communicating it to the customer anyway? But no matter how many times you have to pick up the phone and call a customer and say, hey, remember when we said we would be finished with this next week? X, Y, and Z happened, and we're not going to be able to finish it for another 2 months. It doesn't get easier, no matter how many times you have to make that phone call. For me, and I think a lot of people would agree, is what makes it easier is when you can give them that heads up as early as possible. And
yeah, for sure. Well, and the other piece with that too is when the clients maybe engaged and somewhat responsible for that timeline, having that information available kind of upfront in the process, that also can help hold them accountable for their components that I guess contribute to that timeline. So it works on both sides. It keeps you accountable for delivering. It gives you insight into your resourcing. And when those timelines slip, like you said, having those conversations, they're not fun, but doing them as soon as you can is absolutely the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
Clients appreciate that.
And having the critical path and the baseline timeline lets you see where that's going to happen, right? If something doesn't get done on time, and if it's on the critical path and you already identified that if that slips, it would have an impact to the end, you have that information right there to say, hey, because customer, I wasn't able to get access to your network for 2 weeks. It's going to push everything out 2 weeks, and you can show them that, whether it's the cutover, the end of the project. And we've got some information here, things that are, and we've talked about a lot of these, what's important to build that base timeline. I think, capacity constraints, building timelines around capacity, we could talk about for a very long time. It's something that is very real, and you need to take it into account. And this is where the scheduling piece comes in as well too. So we'll talk about that. But I did just want to briefly mention, we see pretty consistently across the industry, everybody budgets their hours, and it depends what system you're in, but mostly it's budgeted hours or work estimates. We call it work estimates. Everyone gets that, right? Because that shows you how much work it's going to take to get a specific task done. I think what we see a lot of, we spend a lot of time on is talking about durations and dependencies, right? And we need those two things to build our timeline, right? If we think that reviewing the client's network is going to take 4 hours, over what period of time? Do we get it done in one day? Do we have, a week to do that? Because we've got a little bit of back and forth, as you mentioned earlier, Becca. And then the dependencies. So what tasks need to be completed for that work to start? And then what tasks can't start until that task is complete? So, durations, dependencies, both really, really important to help build that timeline, that critical path. I think just, Becca, you'd said with the tools that you had previously available, it can be hard to leverage and use those. So a lot of people just don't, because they don't do much for you in some of those other systems, but really they are critical to building that timeline. And we'll show you how we make applying both of those things to your tasks really, really easy. So as we're talking about timeline, we'll, as Kate dropped in the chat there, we will keep an eye on questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock, make sure we have plenty of time for demo as well too. So the next piece of that, right, is scheduling, putting time on the calendar. And as I mentioned, this was a little bit of a shift for us because historically project management, it's, hey, here are my tasks. Here's my start date, my due date. This is my duration. This is how many hours. So your resources can look at that and they can say, okay, I have until next Friday. I got to get this done. I can look at my own calendar. I can manage that. And a lot of this scheduling piece depends on where your resources are working out of. Where do they go to see their work? Do they look at an open ticket list? Do they look at their projects, right? Do they look at the work plans and their projects? Depends if they're shared resources or not. Or do they go and look at their calendar in a PSA? Do they look at their Outlook calendar? It really depends on where your resources go. Becca, have you, two-part question. Where's your preferred way to go and see what work you have? And then, have you, what, and it can be different, but what is where have you seen the most success and where people should go to see their work? Or what tips, tricks have you seen work?
Sure. So I've actually worked with kind of both processes. So having people really go into their calendar to see what they're working, especially if it's going to be time specific work. I've seen folks use the calendar. In the calendar, if you're using ConnectWise in the calendar, there's also the option to show the calendar view and then do the drop down to also display your tickets at the bottom. For me personally, if I was working tickets at a certain point in time when I was doing tickets, I would use my calendar view and then pull up the list of tickets too at the bottom, and then I could drag and drop things. For if you do have on the service side, if you are structured in a way that you're assigning tickets, but not necessarily putting them on the calendar, then maybe those engineers are going into their, their day view and just looking at a list and working off SLAs, which they're determining what ticket they're working as based on SLAs. On the project side, primarily though, I would say calendars were my preference, and actually scheduling things on calendars. So we knew if those resources had bandwidth to do something maybe on the service side or help on the service side. So I'm calendar all the way. I really liked seeing that visual, but also having that option to have the list of tickets at the bottom. I don't know if anybody else has used that functionality. It's just in your calendar and ConnectWise, and you can change that to actually see the list of tickets too. But that was what my preference was most of the time.
Yeah, so a little bit of a hybrid, and I completely forgot to mention, I think part of it too is, how do you dispatch your tickets? You make a great point on SLAs, on service tickets, do you have somebody that is dispatching service tickets as they come in? Do you use that same dispatcher to dispatch your project tickets, or do your project managers schedule and dispatch your project tickets? It depends. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I think what's really important to recognize with these two things, the baseline timeline and the scheduling, is if you don't have a baseline timeline, it's going to make it really hard to schedule, right? Because if you don't know when things can actually happen, then you are just throwing darts to try to find a time on somebody's calendar, say, well, maybe do the configuration next week on Wednesday, right? And then that resource gets to Wednesday and they go to configure and they say, well, we haven't even ordered this stuff. It hasn't even come in yet. I can't do this. So they've already burned 30 minutes trying to go in and figure out what they can work on. And then they say, well, I can't. So they log time against the ticket that probably shouldn't be billable, right? And you get into that whole swirl. So really you need that timeline so you can accurately schedule. And as we start to get into talking about automating things in the Moovila platform, if you don't have a timeline and you don't have durations and dependencies, you cannot automate your project timeline, right? And if you don't automate your timeline, you're not going to be able to use, I shouldn't say you're not, you can use the tool to automate the scheduling aspect, but it's going to make it really hard, right? So we've got to work through having that timeline and then using that to schedule out. And then to Becca's point, right, you still look maybe a hybrid approach, right? Things that are scheduled, we've got the list of the tickets on the bottom, right? We do need to take all these other things here into account, holidays and PTO and building those in our timelines and shared resources as well too. So there's a lot to it. There really is.
Yeah, and I think a big thing, you really have to have a good base for good policies and structures in place around what your expectations are for your staff or teams in terms of how they're using their calendars. So the PTO aspect is a really great one to bring up because, what's your PTO approval process look like? How does that get notated? Does that go on their calendars?
Mm-hmm.
Having a clear expectations of what your staff should be doing in terms of managing their own calendars, adding appointments or PTO on their calendars, that communicates out to all those schedulers, hey, this person is unavailable. But you have to have that foundation and be have those policies and expectations in place, and that way, instead of having to go to each resource and say, hey, are you available at this time? Just want to make sure you have that on your calendar and it's clear that I'm going to be out during this window. So you have to have that foundation for any tool to really assist you at all. But when you have that and you're clear about what you expect, being able to schedule on the calendar and know that you're going to see that PTO if it exists. So it's very helpful.
Yeah, it's all, yeah. Asking, hey, can you work on this next Tuesday? Oh, let me check the calendar real quick, right? You just for 2 people, 15 minutes for 2 people, that's 30 minutes. That's, can't get that time.
And then you have to go back to the client and say, hey, I think this window's available. Is this good?
Yeah. And
it's a lot.
It directly impacts your margin and your profitability on your service side and your project side and your overall organization, right? If you're wasting time trying to figure out when you actually can work on things, then that's precious time you could be doing the actual work, right?
It's a lot of work for those schedules, whether on the service side or on the project management side. I mean, it is a lot of, it could be a lot of back and forth when that's not super clear.
Yeah. So, and that's what we're working to solve, right? And that we're going to get into the smart schedules, giving you that single pane of glass where you can see everything. So you can make those decisions, use the automation to make those decisions. So real quick, and we'll show this in the platform as well too. I know we've got some current customers and new customers, so I won't spend too much time, but when we talked about this timeline, part of that is establishing your critical path, which here is the continuous string of critical activities or tasks or tickets or work or whatever you want to call them. They're each of these little squares here between the start and finish of the project. So if anything on this top line here slides or is late or takes longer, it's going to have a direct impact to the finish of this project. And even as your alternate work streams below here potentially take longer, then those may become the critical path, right? So one of the things that Moovila does is we monitor this for you 24/7. So once you build it in your project, we're going to monitor it for you. So as things go late, and even down to the point where it's 4 o'clock and the task is going to take 3 hours, we're going to say, hey, you have insufficient time. This is going to roll into tomorrow. We will make that change for you. We will automate and show you that change in that critical path, and we'll reforecast the end date and the start and due dates on all those subsequent tasks as well too. We touched on a lot of reasons why this is important, right? It helps you with your overall timeline on the project. This helps you manage those changes and shifts a lot easier, right? And what we talked about, proactively calling out to customers and saying, hey, you didn't get us this here, and visually showing them this is the impact it has all the way down, and letting the system automate the changes in all those dates too is huge. Because historically what we've seen is, yeah, something changes, I'm not going to spend 15 minutes to go through each of these and then update the dates, right? Let the tools do it for you. Let it automate it for you. Anything else to add on the critical path, Becca?
No. I do like having that visual though, and being able to see it, and not just a list of the tasks, but actually having it all in that view.
Yeah.
If you're kind of a visual person, like I am sometimes, being able to see that and what those changes are going to do, what that impact looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right, this is your baseline timeline. We build this out before we start scheduling things on the calendar. There's ways that, we could sit here and talk about all the technical terms with project float, free float, lead, lag, finish minute, like all these PMI terms. But essentially, you build this out. If you have a firm date for that cutover, you've got to be in an office by a certain point, right? There's tools to use. There's techniques, processes that you can use to inform the rest of your timeline around that. But really, you build this first, and then you go and schedule and you put it on the calendar, because without this and without automating this, you're scheduling in the dark. You don't know if that work can actually happen at that point in time, and you can't automate that scheduling piece if you don't have this. So talking about scheduling and scheduling techniques, and we won't go into this, as I said, we won't go into this too much. We'll talk about it. Sorry. As I said, there's a lot of different trains of thought around this in the overall project management space and also within the MSP space. And it depends on a lot of these things, like, do you have a dispatcher, shared resources, all that sort of stuff. I would recommend whatever you pick, be consistent, right? What gets tricky is if you have multiple resources, engineers, and you let Jim over here manage his own calendar, and you don't schedule down to the hour for him. But then you have to remember that for John over there, you've got to put everything down to the hour on his calendar. You got to be consistent, right? You can't, it makes it really hard on your resources and the people doing that resourcing if there's inconsistency. So what we've seen is, some people, they've only run a couple projects, and maybe they're a little bit newer to the MSP space, a little bit lower maturity level, and they will just block certain times every week on their calendar to do project work. So if you have a shared resource that is working service tickets and project work, you might say, hey, every Tuesday and Thursday from 12 to 4, I want you to do project work. I don't necessarily care well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not necessarily going to tell you work on this one here and then this one and then this one and this one. You still have your baseline timeline. So you still have your due dates on those tasks so they can see when things are due, but they're going to go into that 4-hour block and then they're going to review their project tickets and they're going to say, okay, I need to work through each of these, right? So it's kind of just blocking time to do project work. If you're not able to do that project work, and as you said, Becca, an escalation comes up and everybody's all hands on deck, then we've got to take everything and shift it because we missed that 4-hour block there. Some other ways we've seen it is specific project hour blocks. So we'll say, hey, every Wednesday from 12 to 4, I want you to work on the network upgrades for customer ABC, right? So instead of just a generic project block, you're just of all projects, you're now saying, hey, at this time, I want you to work on this project and this project and then this project. And then the last one there is probably what we see most often. And I think where we see most people going, especially as the tools here are going to make it easier to do this, but is saying, hey, I want you to work on this task for this project at this time, right? And so that when that resource goes to their calendar and they're looking at their day and they finish their 1 o'clock meeting and their notification pops up, they say, okay, 2 o'clock, I'm working on this ticket on this project. That way, the resource doesn't have to go hunt and peck and say, well, what's the next ticket in that project that I need to work? Or, which project do I want to go work on? It really, you're taking the admin work out of the resource or the engineer's hands so that they can do the technical, complicated work that you want them to be doing. Becca, I know you've already said your preference there, right? I think I know what that one is. But any other styles or techniques around scheduling that you've seen on the project side, or even on the service ticket side?
I think the point you made, and I think this is a really good point that I just wanted to kind of touch on around the consistency across your schedulers, and just making sure that everybody's working in the same way. So if you do have your service side and you have dispatchers on your service side, the expectations of having things on the calendar is the same for them, and your project managers, if they're scheduling the same resources. If those departments are completely separated with their resources, then yeah, maybe you have differences there. If you have engineers that are managing their calendars on their own, which is a tough place to get to, it'd be really difficult. Just making sure that they are putting those times on their calendar. It's really important because like I said, it communicates out to everybody else. So the consistency and how you're doing things is huge. And those engineers or resources can, like you said, it can be very frustrating if they're trying to figure something out. The scheduling can be frustrating, and also the resources working those items, if they have to kind of dig to figure out what item they're supposed to be working on, it can be challenging. So I think you hit on the big pieces. If you're going to use scheduling, just trying to be consistent with it across the teams that are using those same resources.
Yeah absolutely. And again, back to the shared resources, right? If you have really shared resources, and when I say really shared resources, that's super technical. What I mean is, if you've got project engineers that are doing 90% of their project work, they're your tier 3, and they only get pulled into like VIP high level escalations, right? Then that's a little bit different. But if you have resources that, hey, you're just going to work the next ticket that's available, whether it's a service ticket or a project ticket. So truly your split could vary week to week, or it's right down the middle at 50-50. I would say if they're used to looking on their calendar to see times on which service tickets to work on, you're going to want the project tickets there as well too. You don't want resources that say, okay, well, I'm working a service ticket and I just finished that service ticket and now I have nothing on my calendar. So I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to wait for that next thing to come in. Right. And as crazy as that may sound,
It's happened.
it happens for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you know, if you're telling them, hey, I'm going to schedule your service ticket work this way, you're going to want the project work to be the same way. You don't want them having to do service tickets and then say, okay, well, I've got white space in my calendar. Let me go jump over here, look at projects over here. What do I want to work on over here? Oh, someone's yelling at me about service tickets. Let me come back. That's just, they're going to get tired of that, right? And that's not efficient. So if they really are shared resources between those two sides of the business, that consistency is even more important. So with that, anything else to add, Becca, before I jump into the demo? I think we're doing pretty good on time here. I haven't seen any questions pop in yet, but Kate, keep me honest if I miss any. All right, so let's get in to Moovila. And like I said, we'll do a little bit of a high level overview for those of you that might not have had too much experience in the platform. So what I jumped into here is the project portfolio. And, you know, we've got a lot of different ways to view and group data in the platform so that whatever works best for you, you can set up your view that way. And this is our portfolio. So I've got some projects here on the left-hand side and some data associated with each of these. And then on the right-hand side, this is what we call our timeline view. And it's a representation of the overall baseline timeline of that project that we've talked about. So we can see that at the beginning here on this project for 198 yellow network upgrades, it started back here in June. And this dark purple, I'm able to see the progress along the way, right? I've got this all black diamond. That's a milestone that's been completed. I can see I've got a little red blip here. So I've got some tasks, some work in that project that's late. I've got some other milestones along the way that looks like they've been completed. We've got some that are forecasted late. And then because I've built a critical path and I've built a baseline timeline on this project, I can see that, hey, even though there's might be some things that are going wrong, I'm still forecasted to finish this 13 days early compared to the due date that I set on that project or that the customer has provided for us. So the automation within the platform is going to give you this representation of your timeline at a high level view. And paired with that, another piece of automation that's specific to Moovila is what is our RPAC score. So our RPAC score is essentially a health score. It's a credit score for your project. It's something that we're calculating and looking at 24/7. And at a high level, it looks at two things. It says, how good of a project plan have you built? Have you built a well-structured plan with durations and dependencies like we talked about earlier? And then how are you performing on the overall timeline of the project? And that's against the overall due date and then on a task by task basis. So you as a PM that might be managing 40, 50, 60 projects can jump into the platform in the morning. You know that you've kicked all your projects off with good RPAC scores because you've built solid plans. And you can come in and look and say, you know, these are in budgeting, this is in triage, so I'm scheduling it. These are my active projects here. Something's going on with this network upgrades for yellow, right? I know I started at a good score. I've dropped to 197. I got a quick visualization here that I'm 13 days early, but still I need to go and look at this project first instead of just hunting and pecking through every single project to say what's going on here and what's going on there. So I know that, hey, I need to go take a look and see what's up with this project. So we can jump into this project, and what I'm going to jump into is that critical path view that we have in Moovila. So as I talked about, we make it really easy to build this critical path. We've got dependency editors in your power grid view that I was just in that's going to run and feel like a spreadsheet. So you can build dependencies really, really quickly, really, it makes sense, right? It's a spreadsheet. We've all worked through spreadsheets, right? You also can make changes to your dependencies here in the critical path view. You can take this dependency editor and you can drag tasks out of that critical path. You can, take this and remove it from here. And then I want to drop this over at this point in time. And, I want to completely break this structure as well too. So we make it really easy to visually make those changes as well. And as you can see, the system's going to be making updates to put that critical path at the top. So we really make it easy. And it's all, like I said, based on PMI best practices. But this is a big project, right? And I can jump in. I can see I've got a number of different tasks on this project, probably over 50. I don't have to go and look through every single one of these to figure out where my problem is. Moovila is going to call it out for you here in red and say, hey, equipment hasn't been delivered, right? I can't move on with these network upgrades if equipment hasn't been delivered. It was due on 8/6. What we're saying here is today's 8/9. You haven't received it in. We can't forecast dates in the past, but this is the automation that Moovila will do for you. We're gonna forecast these dates for you. We're gonna show you, hey, you've built this baseline, you've built this timeline for this project. Things have changed and shifted as they always do. This is where you can now forecast the start and due dates for every single one of these pieces of work or tickets or tasks or whatever you call them through the entire project plan. And then where are we going to end? What's that last task on that critical path? You can click update here and we'll push start and due dates to every single one of those tasks. And that's going to be integrated with your PSA too. So all that information is going to flow bidirectionally between them. Now, say I was going through a scheduling exercise and I wanted to jump in here and I wanted to schedule Kyle to start prepping and configuring that firewall, right? I've already called out that I don't have the equipment, so Kyle shouldn't be doing this, but let's go in and let's look at the smart schedule here in Moovila. So for some of you, this might be sort of a familiar view, a little bit like a dispatch portal, but with a lot more automation around it. So what we're looking at here is we've got Kyle's calendar integrated with Gmail. So I'm pulling all the meetings that Kyle has on his calendar into this smart schedule view. If we're integrated with PSA, we can pull in those items off of those calendars. So if individuals are scheduled on service tickets, like we talked about, if they've got, company-wide meetings that are on the dispatch portal in there, we'll pull all that information in here for you. You can also set up Outlook integrations as well. So we could then pull in and show you where people have Outlook meetings or putting that PTO or that vacation time on their calendar. And essentially I'm saying, hey, I need to schedule Kyle for these 10 hours of work. And what we will do and what Moovila will do and the automation will do for you is we're going to say, hey, the start and due date on this task here is 8/7 to 8/11. Find me the next 1 hour block that Kyle can work on this. And we're going to say, well, he's got time today from 4 to 5. Right? That would be the next time that he can work on this. Quickly, double click, save that. That'll schedule that on Kyle's calendar. It'll flow over to the PSA so that it appears over there and Kyle knows at 4 o'clock, hey, I need to prep and configure this firewall. We've got options here too. You can schedule 2 hours and 4 hours and 8 hours. So if I want to schedule him for 8 hours, I can start flipping through Kyle's calendar and say, well, there is not a single time that Kyle has 8 hours available to do this work, right? So maybe I go back, I try 4 hours, I can see that Monday he'd be able to work on this from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, but we're also going to throw indicators for you here that says, well, that would make, if you schedule that for Kyle, that is going to be on 8/12, which is late compared to the August 11th date. And it's going to fall outside of that window as well too. But as we talked about, the equipment hasn't been delivered. Kyle can't work on this, right? And that's where the automation around the critical path and Moovila is huge, because we can see that, yeah, these were the dates I have on that task. I need to update my timeline on this project. Kyle's not going to be able to start prepping and configuring until 8/10 to 8/14. So if we switch back to look at today, or let's look at next week, we've got this option here in the smart schedule in Moovila to say, show me the actual dates that are set on the tasks, or show me the forecasted dates. Show me what it actually looks like when Kyle can actually work on this task. And then that is going to work with your schedule auto find. And now we're going to find the next 4 hour block that matches within in that forecast date. So really what you can do is you can come in here and say, well, need to update my project plan before I schedule Kyle. I don't want to schedule Kyle to work on this today from 4 to 5. He gets there to the end of the day on Friday and he says, okay, I'm going to prep and configure this firewall, and it's not there and he can't do it. Right. And now it takes Kyle about 20 minutes to figure that out. Kyle's going to be like, well, it's 4:20 on a Friday. Did not mean to do that. But he's going to say, you know, I'm done for the day. I'm not working. Right. So this is where automating that timeline is massive for automating the scheduling piece and letting Moovila then tell you, hey, show me the next 2-hour block. You can work on this, right? And you can flip through this, you can edit. I want to find a 3-hour block to schedule, Kyle. We'll find you the next 3-hour block. And then in addition to that RPAC score, toggling that on and off, as Becca mentioned, I want to see what the calendar looks like, but I also want to see all these other tasks down below that I'm assigned to. So if I'm doing a little bit of that hybrid where, hey, I've got to get the work done by this date and I have these hours, I can see all of these tasks here below. So I know I burned through that rather quickly. There's a lot more to this. We have resource matching in here. So based on your resource type and your skills required for a piece of work, we'll find you the best user. So if you have that task unassigned, and you say, I need a project engineer that's advanced in servers and it's going to be 3 hours, we'll show you, hey, this is your best bet of the user that can take on this work. This is the time that it could happen. And then you can assign and schedule that quickly and efficiently in here. But the point we really wanted to make and get across in today's session was, you know, we've got to have that baseline timeline, that critical path. Let Moovila do that automation there for you. We'll help you build it. We'll make it really clean and easy. And then when you go to schedule, you don't have to worry about saying, well, are they on PTO next week? Hey, can you work on this next Wednesday? No, we give you the options. Pull in Outlook, pull in PSA. We'll show it to you here. You don't have to burn time on asking things. And within seconds, you can say, all right, 4-hour block. I'm going to schedule Kyle on Monday. Save that. Done. Shows up on his calendar. He knows he needs to work on it. So. Becca, keep me honest.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited about this. I think it's going to be huge with, like you said, combination with having that baseline and the other features that you're already utilizing, Moovila. Having the calendar, seeing all those things that could already be booked for somebody. You're able to determine your scheduling better, but also those resources know what's going on their calendars. It's just, I'm really excited about this, and I'm excited to see our clients start to use it.
Yeah, you're right. Helping make everybody's lives easier. The project manager, the dispatcher, the scheduler, but also the techs, right? This is what I got to work on. I think we got a question in there. So DJ asked, if your techs don't update on their side, how does that affect the automation? So great question. If they don't update their tasks, right? So if Steve was supposed to confirm that this was received, we're going to throw that flag right away that, hey, this task has not been completed. It shows in progress. If he doesn't flag that as complete, or if he doesn't change that status there to complete, we're going to reforecast everything in the project. And then on the schedule side, if individuals are not marking their schedules done, we'll show you all those open appointments. We'll show them late in the past. We'll give you flags and risks and indicators to say, hey, show me all scheduled entries that are late. And so you can have a quick view of that across all your projects, not just one. And then you have that information at your hands to make those informed decisions that you need to. But really that's the big thing of the platform is if resources aren't updating the status and completing their tasks, your projects are going to go down the toilet very fast. Your RPAC score is going to drop. You're going to see that. You can call it out quickly, and then you can quickly see how that then reforecasts the rest of your project plan. Now, if they're just not updating their statuses, and that is a change in process or a culture change that you're working to get through your organization, this helps bring that to light and say, hey, this is why we need to update statuses so we can accurately forecast, so you know when you're working on things. It helps with that culture change, we find a lot, because they now understand, okay, I'm doing this for a reason so that people can see things. But if that's something that you're trying to work through in your organization, getting people to update their statuses, we make it really easy in here as well too. You can bulk copy and paste your status across tasks, across a number of portfolios, projects at the same time. So Daniel asks, hey Daniel, can you amortize schedules across multiple days or specific days? Example, every Wednesday for an hour in the next month. So I think you're referring to the span function, similar to the span function in ConnectWise. Yeah, right. So not exactly. We are going to think about it a little bit differently. So we've got our durations that we set on our tasks, which are important. We do have a function in here that allows you to look at scheduling one of two ways. We allow you to look at, or you can look at both. You can look at front loading or optimizing. So saying, hey, if Kyle needs to work on these 10 hours, I want to, what does Kyle's schedule look like? His capacity look like if we schedule all 10 hours as early as possible, right? And then we also give you the option to say, hey, I want to amortize that across the duration, which is what we refer to as the peanut butter spread. So, hey, he's got 10 hours to get this done across 5 days. We're going to look at scheduling 2 hours per day across that time. So we give you the option that way. As far as the span, scheduling every Wednesday for the next however many weeks, that's something we're going to put in here pretty quickly once we get it released. All right, Vanessa says, my engineers are not in Moovila. They still use ConnectWise to see their project tickets. However, they're also doing daily dispatch tickets for clients. When will I be able to see those come across for capacity purposes? So as soon as we get this smart schedule released into full production, part of the release for this is that we are then going to be pulling in all scheduled entries from the ConnectWise calendar. So if they're scheduled on service tickets, if they put their scheduled entries in there, I'm right with your response, Vanessa. Yes. So what we're doing is we're pulling a report of every individual, every user in your Moovila instance from ConnectWise. We will then visualize in here everywhere that they have ConnectWise service tickets scheduled or anything else. And part of the auto schedule will work around those as well too. So if they're scheduled on a service ticket, if Kyle had a service ticket scheduled here, we wouldn't recommend this. We'd then say he can't work on this till Thursday. Cool. Yeah, we're really excited about this. Like I said, this was timeline versus schedule, something really early on for us. That we identified that we needed to address and help this market with. So this is something our team has put a lot of work in. We've put a lot of thought into it. We also understand that we've got to automate it for you as well too. There's the days of manually finding times on people's calendars is not worth it anymore. So I'll grab the last question. Don't yell at me, Kate, if I know I'm close. I got a minute. If something is scheduled in both Outlook and ConnectWise, will it double scheduled? So if you have your Outlook to ConnectWise integration turned on, we recommend not turning on Outlook to Moovila. Now, I understand that some people, that things can go wonky there and there's issues with Teams links and whatnot. However, we recommend not turning on Outlook to Moovila because you're already going to be getting those Outlook meetings into Moovila through ConnectWise. If you did want to turn both on, you could. We will look at both, and we do it already. When we release it, we'll do it already with the Moovila scheduled work and the ConnectWise. So like if you're scheduling work in Moovila, that's going to show on the ConnectWise calendar. So when we pull that report back from ConnectWise, we see that again. We do match and we reference both of these and we go, okay, these are both the same thing. We don't need to show the ConnectWise one. It's a Moovila one. So for Outlook, we try to do that as best we can. Outlook formats things a little bit differently. So we do find that they will appear next to each other. But when we start to look at capacity, we won't double count it because we'll say there's no way you can be in the same place twice. So we won't double count it. The other thing that we are doing differently from most dispatch portals is once resources complete their scheduled activities, whether they're service tickets or project tickets, we are going to hide them from our smart schedule, because what we want to do here is help you schedule open work and automate that for you. So if Kyle was able to work on something early that he was originally scheduled for Thursday, he marked that done. We're not going to show it because he has that time free. So we've found that is, I think, is going to be a big benefit, a big difference from the way the PSAs do it, because even with closed tickets, they'll show, in someone else's office and the desk started going up. Even below here with your open tasks, we won't show you open tasks. They're closed, they're complete. There's no work remaining. Why should we show you something that has no work remaining on it? So
I was very
okay,
excited about that.
You cut me off. Sorry, Kate. I told you.
Everyone's so excited. I mean, I love to see it in the chat. Honestly, like Lewis put it up, I put the demo link up a little bit ago. If you're new, obviously you can see all the customers. We've also got a case study page where you can hear. I don't think anyone on here today has a video. And we always appreciate reviews. If you're one of the customers on and you'd love to review us on like G2 or channel program, we've got links we can give you for that, or you can find it yourself. Just email me at kate@moovila.com. But we appreciate it, everybody. Again, if you have more questions, please send them to sales@moovila.com, or you can email your direct sales rep if they haven't demoed this for you yet, or your onboarding person, your Becca, your Lewis, Bucky, Jared, any of those people. But we are super, super excited about this new product. We hope that you will, if you're an existing user, that you will happily use it and continue to give Lewis feedback on it. But yes, if you haven't booked a demo yet, we appreciate it. And we will have another webinar next month. So stay tuned on the watch. And lastly, it's our last day with my last minute for our summer dad jokes contest. If you missed it, we're giving $1,000 away to the person who can tell us the best dad joke, as inspired by MSP Geek's dad jokes channel. So if you think you have it, shoot your jokes in there today, because it's the last day for it. And thank you again, Becca. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, everybody, for staying on and hearing about this awesome new feature. And we will see you again next month. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Thank
Becca.
you.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye.
Awesome.